Hi everyone, my name is Kathie Beltz and welcome to the View Arts Center. I've been fortunate enough this year to judge the Quilts Unlimited exhibition. I'm from Greenfield, New Hampshire. I've been quilting for 27 years actually. I have been teaching for 17 years and obviously I'm a quilt judge. I've been judging for about 14 years. Back in 2013 I became a certified instructor for Studio 180 Design. And back in 2017, I started my own line of quilt patterns, Kathie Beltz Quilt Designs. I do live teaching, I do virtual teaching, I've got a whole lot going on. But it gives me a great broad experience for my judging. I consider my judging work an extension of my teaching work. So I'm always studying, always learning, always keeping up on the latest and greatest in the quilting community. So, right here is one of my award-winning quilts, which I love to brag about. This is Skyfall. There are 58 different stars in this quilt, and it's quilted by my quilting partner, Mara Novak. This frame is actually quilted. She's done an amazing job. When I became a certified instructor for Studio 180 Design, they have a whole line of tools from the company. And I wanted to showcase those tools by making a sampler quilt. This is a very exaggerated sampler quilt, but I took all the tools that they made at the time and I made as many different stars as I possibly could out of the tools, and I put them all in one quilt. And I don't typically make quilts that are block, very traditional. I like to do something just a little more innovative with my quilts. So that's how this got developed. This is one of the quilts in the exhibit. This is Cat Groove by Sue D. Vandy from Australia. This quilt came all the way from Australia. This shows a lot of the elements that we're looking for when we judge quilts. So we're looking for the actual design, the way the quilt is composed, the way the design is composed, the balance of all the elements, the balance of all the colors and the features. There are all kinds of balance. There's symmetrical balance, which is half and half, 50-50. It could be up and down or side to side. There's asymmetrical balance, which this is slightly asymmetrical because the focus, the cat, is slightly off to the right. It's not right in the middle, it's not half and half. So this is asymmetrical. I can show you another quilt later that has a radial balance where it's actually like in circles or exploding. We look for balance in color, we look for balance in shapes. Proximity of shapes, like these two shapes are similar to each other, so they're closer to each other. The circles are close to each other. This creates a pair as opposed to one little sliver floating in space by itself. So all those, and there's one here and one here, so that creates some balance. It's sections of balance and then overall balance. There's lots of elements to it. The quilting in this particular quilt is exceptional because this is a very mid-century modern feel to this quilt. So there's the mid-century modern elements quilted into the background too. So the entire design, the quilting and the piecing and the applique all work together to create one overall design. This is really a fabulous quilt. Please stop by and see it when you're here. We have a wide diversity, a wide range of quilts here at the exhibit this year, which is really fabulous. The cat quilt is a pictorial quilt. This quilt right here we would consider a modern quilt, which is different from a contemporary quilt or an art quilt. Definition of modern is minimalist. You can see this is very basic. Very basic quilting, lots of negative space involved. No border. A lot of modern quilts don't have borders or bindings on them. It's just a facing going off the edge of the quilt. Modern is a term that developed probably about 10-12 years ago when younger quilters started moving into the market and decided to come up with their own they were inspired by new designs. They were inspired by graphic artists. So modern quilts will be very graphic. They're minimalist and they're basic, but they're very graphic. So that sort of defines the modern quilts. This is really a great layout of these particular blocks because even though it's just little blocks, small blocks, the way the colors are laid out and the values of those colors are laid out, it looks like it's just radiating out from the center. I was talking about a radial balance. This has a radial balance because it looks like it's spreading out. Plus the circular quilting helps with that effect too. So this is Untitled by Liz Cunny of Morristown, New Jersey. Now this one, I would probably consider it to be modern traditionalist, which is a blend of the traditional and the modern. It's the basic log cabin block, which makes it traditional, but the bright colors, the solid colors, a lot of modern quilts use solid fabrics as opposed to prints. Same thing here. The bright colors, that's what makes it modern. No border. Oh, there is a border on this one. And it's got a nice broken border on it and a nice scrappy binding. But the bright colors, very minimal straight line quilting. This would be more of a modern, that's one of the subcategories I was talking about, modern traditionalist. Okay, so now we've come to a traditional quilt. This is Fall All Around by Ryn McDaniel of Hiram, Ohio. This is very traditional blocks, traditional type of fabrics used in this. So there's a log cabin block, a star block. These are pieced. The leaves are appliqued. So there's two different techniques on this quilt, the piecing and the applique. Lots of plaids give it a very homey feel, very fall feel. And the fabrics that are chosen for the leaves are very leafy. You know, they're not solid, but they have some texture to them, so they look like leaves. You're not going to use a plaid in something like this. You're going to use something that's mottled, that has some texture to it. So this is a really fabulous quilt. It's made really well. The plaid, working with plaids is difficult. And this person did a fabulous job on the plaids. They're actually cut straight. They're not wonky, they're not crooked. Every single plaid that's in this quilt is cut exactly the way it should be. And that requires a lot of attention and a lot of work. So this is a very well made quilt. So when I'm judging, I actually go through a process in my head. The venue, the sponsor of the show, will give me guidelines as to what they're looking for, what's important. You know, this is an art center, so design is very important. So there's a section on the initial presentation of the quilt, how it looks. Is it square? Is it flat? If it's square, if it's supposed to be square, is it flat? It doesn't have any distortions in it. It's not dirty. It doesn't have cat hair. It doesn't have a cigarette smoke odor to it. It needs to be clean so it's presentable for the show. Then the next section is color and design. So I actually look at the layout of the design, the colors that are used, the elements that I talked about earlier that are used, the type of blocks that are used, and how the whole design works together. Now I'm talking about the design of the fabric and of the blocks. I'm also talking about design of the quilting, because if you have the right quilting on a quilt top, it can totally transform that quilt top. So we do look at the design of the quilting. And then the next section is workmanship, how it was actually constructed and how well it was constructed. So it doesn't matter which technique is used, if it's pieced or appliqued or painted or ruched or however that top is created, what we're looking at is quality, how well it's done, each individual section of it. So I'm looking for precision piecing, so all the pieces are put together accurately, so that if you're making these stars, the points have to be nice and sharp. If you're making log cabins, every one of these strips has to be even in width. The applique pieces have to be sewn on with nice smooth curves and sharp points, and they have to be secure. The stitches have to be invisible. There's a lot more that I look at, but that's some of the basics. So the actual construction of the top is done, and then I look at the quilting as it's executed. Are the stitches nice and even? Are they consistent in length and width and length? Are they tight where they're supposed to? If you're making small curves, you want smaller stitches. If you're making straight lines, you can use bigger stitches. Are the stitches appropriate for each section that's being worked on? Then we look at the back. We always look at the back of the quilt because that's where you can see the quilting better. And then you can see if there are problems with the quilting, if there's tension issues, if there's knots or thread nests on the back. Again, you can look to see how well the stitches are made from the back. So a quilt is a three-dimensional item, as opposed to a painting or a watercolor, which is pretty much two-dimensional. Quilts are three-dimensional, so that's why we always look at the back. And we also look at the sides, at the binding. The binding it's the last thing that we put on the quilt, and it kind of gets put on in a rush because we're always in a hurry to finish. But the binding is the most important part of the quilt, because if it's a well-loved quilt, if it's actually used, this is the first thing that wears out. So it needs to be applied securely and properly in order for it to last longer. We're always looking at the durability of the quilt. So here are two great examples of art quilts. These are more landscapey type of quilts that I was talking about earlier. This is Grapes of Cath by Kathie Beltz of Topeka, Kansas. And this is also Kathie's. This one's called Keeping Time. So you can see they're landscape type quilts. The construction of these is technically applique, but it's also sort of collage. There are tiny little pieces of green fabric that are layered on here and then sewn down to create the trees. There are tiny slivers of fabric to create the wood clapboards on the barn. There's a nice layer of, I want to say chenille. It's a thin net kind of fabric here. This is not painted. It looks like it's painted, but it's casting a shadow is a clear netted kind of fabric that creates the illusion of the shadows across the quilt. Lots of great techniques involved in this. Again, it doesn't have a border because it doesn't need it. This one up here is a vineyard, I'm guessing, because beautiful vineyards designed back here. Again, lots of little pieces of green to create the shrubbery. This bush over here has purple flowers in it. The stones are cut out individually and laid on top. So there's tiny pieces of fabric that are layered to create the image. And then there's what's called thread painting. These trees, these vines in the background are actually thread. That's just buildup of thread in different colors to make it look that there's a vineyard in the background here. So again, lots of really great techniques to create the overall image. Lots of components that all work together really well to make it, both of them are really wonderful pieces. So these would be considered art quilts. So I just want to say thank you to the View Center for Arts and Culture for inviting me to come judge this exhibit this year. It's a fabulous show. The range of types of quilts available is just incredible. There's actually an international show this year. There were quilts from all over the world actually here. Australia, France, Italy, and lots of local quilts too, which is wonderful. It was very difficult to judge the show because the talent and the quality of these quilts is just, they're all so close together. Trying to rank them to create first, second, and third is difficult. But I was really pleased to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and please come out and see the show.